Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here to review Checkered Ninja. There is quite a bit of times where I would otherwise go and review like big budget like movies or things that everybody has heard of. But then there's also some times on this channel I also want to go out of my way to find and watch movies that maybe no one has heard of. Maybe someone would get intrigued by going into finally seeing some movie that they were like, hey, this is kind of interesting. Like, never heard of this one before. So, going into this film is not easy to find, but I remind people that I have suggested through numerous other apps. If you dare in fact cannot find a film, I have an app to dare in fact suggest to you to be able to see this movie for absolutely free. Definitely, I would suggest you can probably go into a Movie Pro like app, or you can go to a Ultra Play app, an Ultra Play Movies HD app that I have consistently been using, and it has worked out perfectly so far. And you can today watch the movie Checkered Ninja. It actually really has a very interesting story, a kind of maybe off putting beginning of the film, but that off putting beginning of the film has a reason for it because we eventually have a checkered ninja that is going to go out of its way to seek vengeance. I say its way because it is a kind of like a child's play like approach kind of movie. To me, while I was kind of watching this film, there was like a lot of beats here that honestly did remind me a lot of Child's Play. We also have this checkered ninja character that seems to be able to mimic a lot of other voices, even the main character's voice. Here's one thing that I'm going to have to mention right here and now, that in spoilers, when I do have to go over this movie, there is going to be at some points in time where I'm going to have to forcibly skirt over some person's names because there actually was no real way for me to be able to find a cast list or be able to find the right names for every single person within this movie. So there might be from time to time me skirting around trying to come up with some alternate name for a character because it's very difficult to be able to know who everyone is in this movie. And plus, there is quite a bit of characters within this film. So I try to do my best to just kind of listen in and try to figure out anyone's name in this movie, and so on and so forth. So, with that said, here is the teeing up of this movie that will actually get some people interested. So, Checkered Ninja is a movie about a kid who ends up getting a doll for his, or I would say much more of a stuffed doll for a birthday, and we end up having this doll being a ninja, and it of course is a ninja that instead of being all black, he ends up being a checkered ninja, a white and or black ninja. So we end up having also this checkered ninja being possessed by some spirit who goes out of his way to try to seek out vengeance of a person who has wronged someone. But also we have this entire story to try to make a main character called Alex or Alexander seemingly a more popular person at his school. So there's kind of two things kind of going on here simultaneously. We end up having it to where the ninja is going to help Alex, and then Alex is going to do the exact same to try and help this ninja make his way to this guy he is going to seek vengeance upon. And yeah, like, really a very interesting story and a thing that I actually just really did actually enjoy because it was a fun movie. It was kind of goofy. We really have it to where like you couldn't tell exactly what side the checkered ninja was on. At some points he was actually going against Alex, and then sometimes or most oftentimes he was actually helping out Alex with girlfriend issues or uh, the bully at school or uh, just him overall just being a much more popular kid in school and so on and so forth. We end up having it to where this checkered ninja ends up going and, of course, trying to very much teach Alex also how to fight. We end up also finding out the real story of this checkered ninja, like his real true backstory that ends up going upon a song that ends up going along with us understanding this character. But also we end up finding out his backstory, which I thought was really interesting. It seems that this character was a ghost entity that seems to fuse itself to dead things and then get vengeance on wrongdoers of sorts. And so we end up having this character kind of stepping in from time to time in different kind of things. Eventually, at some point, I think he ended up becoming a dog in one story, one little side story here. But yeah, I thought that this movie is really cool. I thought that it was really like a fun film that we end up having this Alex character having to become a lot more confident, even to the point of him realizing, well, why do I even need to help out this ninja anymore? Like it seems like everything is going right for me, and we end up having the checkered ninja going like, well, yeah, you might think that, right? Well, I'm going to come in and I'm going to ruin your day. Like, I'm going to make sure that you're going to regret thinking that you have everything worked out and that really everything is just going to be uh, like easy for you to be able to just uh, work everything out now. Yeah, this is just overall a fun, nice movie for the most point. It's a real fun movie. I really enjoyed it, and it's a goofy story. It's a goofy movie, but I just liked it. I just thought it was fun. I think it was also interesting that we end up having Alex, who ends up having, for the most point, a stepfather that kind of like treats him like garbage, and we end up having this kid's mother who seems to be trying to create these bizarrish like foods that make no sense. And we also have a stepbrother named Sean who is to really just annoy the crap out of Alex to where we have this guy who is to basically just be the annoying older brother in a lot of aspects. But then eventually we end up having Alex eventually going and finding, and he's fantasizing over this one girl at school, which is Jessica, and we eventually have Alex who ends up fighting against the school bully Glenn, but he ends up fighting him in his own way, which I kind of think is a really cool way of actually fighting it out, which there isn't actually much of fighting. It's just like he ends up kind of tricking Glenn, let's just say. But go out of your way to check out this movie. Again, there is kind of maybe an off-putting beginning of this film, but eventually, when we get past that, it's a very cool story. It's also kind of, it seems like it's kind of dancing between uh, like a horror movie and not being a horror movie. It's kind of like toting those two lines. I thought it was really interesting. So, with that said, I think it's now about that time to go into spoilers about this film. So, again, when I get into spoilers, we're going to see how much I actually remember of these cast names because it will probably be fairly difficult. So, let's get into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this movie. So, in the very beginning of this film, we end up going into a sweatshop, which, uh, with the way of which that this sweatshop operates, could possibly offend some people, and I'll showcase why. So we end up having an American guy, seemingly being a person that owns this sweatshop, and so we end up having this lottie dog rich guy coming in here with a checkered scarf in a sweatshop, and immediately we end up having this American esh like guy going and taking off his the scarf and tossing it off to the side because reasonably it is of course sweaty in this sweatshop. We end up having a seemingly person who has consistently worked nonstop to continue to put ninjas together, to where this person is just like they aren't even thinking, they're just continuing to just keep on uh building and making all these ninjas. And so we end up having it to where this shop worker accidentally goes and makes a ninja out of this man's scarf. And so we end up having it to where the manager of this sweatshop ends up going and beating this worker because they of course did the wrong thing. They didn't realize what they were actually doing. And so then we also have the other sweatshop owner coming in, the American guy, or who I am assuming is American, but I don't think this movie was done in America, but it is what it is. So we end up having this guy who ends up coming in and also taking and beating this shop worker as well. Uh, Beating this person to extents of death. So we end up having this factory going on as per usual, and so we eventually have this sweatshop manager going and taking this ninja, and I think he was going to get rid of it because it is not the usual black ninja, whatever. And so we end up having bizarrely that this factory is bizarrely hit by lightning, which eventually has this lightning being fused into this stuffed doll. And so we end up having the factory or the manager who ends up getting electrocuted as well with this doll. And so we end up having this doll eventually seeking vengeance to this manager worker. But we end up having this doll making his way out of this factory to eventually find this sweatshop owner's credit card. And so he ends up taking it, and he now needs to be able to track this guy down and be able to get to him because he wants to take him out because it's the honorable thing. So we end up having this ninja Esh-like character, this checkered ninja, making his way onto this boat, which is to ship out, of course, any number of things. We end up having this Captain Stewart guy, this guy that is upon this boat. He ends up stumbling upon this checkered ninja, and so he ends up deciding, well, like, what are you doing on here, buddy? Like, and so we end up having Captain Stewart going and taking this checkered ninja and putting it in some bag of sorts because he's going to deliver it as a gift to his to of course his nephew named Alex for a birthday gift. So we end up having us introduce now Alex. We end up we end up having this character kind of unsure about what like he actually does. It seems that Alex was preparing or prepping for some YouTube video, because I think that's what he had mentioned, that he was going to do a YouTube video of sorts, showing people what his day to day was, that he was going and like brushing his teeth and so on and so forth. We end up having Sean, Alex's stepbrother, coming into the bathroom to start to, of course, take a dump, take a crap. And so we end up having Alex going like, dude, like, couldn't you have waited just a couple more minutes? And Sean is like, nope, I couldn't. But hey, man, like, because it's your birthday, I'm going to be able to give you a special gift right about now. And so we end up eventually having Alex, who is to go and have a birthday party of sorts. Well, I think also he ends up going to school and fantasizing the whole entire time about some girl named Jessica, who it seems that he goes and writes her name in a notebook and writes his whole poem thing about how he feels about her, yada, yada, yada. So, but we end up having Alex going to a birthday party where he is to go and start getting gifts. We end up having Alex's stepfather, who is John, going and giving Alex some crappy flower gift that does not make sense for him to get. It's some dancing flower thing that more than likely John had gotten for nothing, for free, or for whatever, off to the side of the road somewhere, probably. But we also have John, who's like, well, I'm going to give Alex a birthday present, but I'm also going to give my son a birthday present as well, because you have to treat them equally. And so we end up having Sean, who ends up getting a video game that he's always ever wanted. And it's like, wow, not exactly equal now, is it? We end up having, of course, Alex's mom making some goofy food that, of course, nobody actually wants to eat. And so we end up having Uncle Stewart coming in to go and meet Alex, and we end up having, of course, Alex, who is so happy to see his uncle. And so we end up having Uncle Stewart coming in and giving crap to Alex's stepfather, mispronouncing his name, so on and so forth. So we end up having Uncle Stewart giving Alex, of course, the present, which of course was the Checkered Ninja, and we end up having Uncle Stewart making up some story that this item was really expensive and that it was very hard to get out of the places which where he was at, and so on and so forth, which was actually bullshit. This guy just found this present off to the side of his boat. So yeah, so we end up having Alex, who ends up going and taking this present. He ends up showcasing this present to a bunch of his friends at lunch, and so on and so forth. And so eventually we end up finding out that it seems that Alex seems to have a bully that is at his school. And so we eventually have it also to where we end up finding out that Alex has to do a stupid book report for Sean of the Lord of the Rings, because Alex has is blackmailing, or because Sean is blackmailing Alex with the Jessica notebook, and when Alex ends up getting the notebook back, we end up finding out that it seems that Sean had made a copy of the poem and whatever that uh, Alex had put in his notebook. So here we go. So we have this whole thing start off with this ninja coming back to life. So we eventually have it to where Alex is to go and get his bike and go and go home for school. And we end up having Alex almost bumping into this bully. And so we end up having the Checkered Ninja consistently mimicking Alex's voice. And so we end up having it to where Alex ends up bumping into Glenn, which is the bully. And so we have it to where the Checkered Ninja calls Glenn a couple of crappy names and whatever and what have you. To where we end up having Glenn going like, huh? And so we end up having this Checkered Ninja consistently shouting out things to Glenn to get him even more angry. So we end up having Alex jumping on this bike and just running off as quickly as humanly possible, and Glenn ends up grabbing a bike to go and chase him down. And so we end up having this Checkered Ninja coming and talking to Alex to basically mention, hey man, like, here's the deal. I'm going to help you out with this whole situation, but you have to do the same for me in kind. And so we end up having Alex desperately demanding or desperately begging to have this ninja help him, and so he does. We end up having Glenn, who ends up getting even closer and closer to Alex, and so we end up having the Checkered Ninja going and taking and rolling something up and shooting some kind of loogie or some kind of something to hit Glenn, to where Glenn ends up falling over onto his bike, and so Alex can just skirt away. So we end up having Alex going into his room to have the Checkered Ninja tell him what he needs to help him with. So we end up having the Checkered Ninja telling Alex that he is to need to find the person who owns this credit card. And we end up having Alex who's like, well, hey, like, why does this last name sound so familiar? Oh yeah, like Jessica has the exact same name. Jessica, the girl of which that Alex is interested in. And so we end up having it to where, like, the Checkered Ninja is like, oh, okay, well, great. Then you need to figure out some way to have this girl get interested in you and be able to go to her party, so that way we can be able to find this guy and be able to take him down. Well, we end up having it to where uh, they have to confirm if reasonably the guy's name that's on the card is the same name as Jessica's father, or is it just a coincidence? So we end up having Sean, who evidently was invited to Jessica's party, and so we end up having to have Alex ask his mother, like, well, hey, you know about this party, right? And she's like, well, yeah. It's like, well, hey, who are Jessica's parents? And so we end up having Alex's mother turning on a blender so Alex doesn't exactly hear what she says. And so we end up having this play around where it seems that we end up finding out that the guy on the card and Al or Jessica's father has the exact same name. So it's like, oh, okay, so this must be the guy. So we end up having the checkered ninja having Alex showcase some treehouse or whatever that he had made. It's some crappy looking treehouse, and so we end up having the Checker Ninja going like, "Dude, we need some serious tools to be able to not only fix up this treehouse, but also put together this kind of uh, this whole elaborate thing that we're going to need to take down Glenn at some point." So we end up having Alex, who ends up going into a woodshop class, and the Checker Ninja ends up trying to take all the tools from this woodshop class, while Alex is to explain to this woodshop teacher that he needs help to try and put together a like sword holder thing that is about a certain size and so on and so forth. And we end up eventually having it to where this woodshop teacher is so baffled and or confused by Alex wanting to put this kind of thing together. It kind of doesn't exactly make any much of sense. And so because the checker ninja said that he actually needed this to hold his sword, and so we end up having Alex, who ends up going to the, I guess, principal's office because of this teacher just kind of having enough of this kid to where he has this goofy idea of what he wants for something to do for this woodshop class. So we end up having it to where Sean is to hold over Alex this whole note thing that Sean had taken um, from Alex's notebook, and so we end up having it to where Alex had to put together this Lord of the Rings paper, and so Alex did. We end up finding out that it seems that Alex did a goofy report uh, for Sean, littered with inaccuracies and all kinds of things, to where Sean ended up getting in trouble and ended up being in the principal's office as well. So we end up having it to where once Sean great. So we end up having Sean leaving, and so Alex is to just kind of be like, man, like this just kind of sucks. Like this kid gets like the best of everything. So we end up having the checkered ninja figuring out a way to kind of get it to where Sean won't have that paper to hold over him anymore. And so we end up having the checkered ninja going into a loudspeaker for the school because somebody had done some announcement prior to this. And so we end up having the checker ninja locking himself into this room, and he ends up changing his voice to Alex's voice, and we end up having the checker ninja confessing his love to Jessica using Alex's voice. And so we end up having Jessica, who is all like swooning. She's like, ooh. So we end up seemingly have it to where Jessica seems to be very flattered by Alex doing this, confessing his love, technically. And so we end up having the principal who is to, like, hey, kid, cut that out. But then eventually he ends up, like, pulling him into his office and he's like, Like, hey kid, nice moves. Like, hey man, like I'm sure anybody would have probably done it and whatever. Like, it's okay. Like I won't be too hard on you. So we end up having it to where eventually Alex is to be at this lunch. And so we end up having the checkered ninja telling Alex to stand on top of this garbage thing, and so we end up having Alex doing so, and so the checkered ninja tells Alex uh, to basically pull a Godzilla and just try to mouth everything that the checkered ninja is saying. So we end up having Alex, who ends up going out of his way to challenge Glenn to a fight on Saturday, and so on and so forth. And so, because we end up having Alex, who asked all the people in the cafeteria who had been bullied by Glenn before, and people started to raise their hands. So we ended up having it to where eventually Alex is to challenge Glenn, and Glenn accepts because he's in the lunchroom. And so we end up having this whole montage of the checkered ninja and Alex, one continuing to fight one another, and eventually we end up having the checkered ninja who ends up making these like sticks to try and train uh, Alex to fight. And we also have it to where they are kind of building this bizarrish like uh, tree house ish like thing, uh, because we end up having it to where Alex has this grand, or the Checker Ninja has this grandmaster plan to try and pull all these trick things of when Glenn is going to try to get through this obstacle course that Alex is going to present for him. So we go on, and so we end up having it to where Alex needs to win this fight to win over Jessica to get to her party, to be the most popular guy in this school. And so we push on to have we push on to have uh, Alex going and fighting Glenn. And so we end up having Glenn showing up, and so we end up having Alex going into his trickery barracks of sorts, where he ends up going to one section of this treehouse thing, and Glenn tries to follow him, and he ends up slipping on some things where Glenn ends up like falling over and having all kinds of egg on his face and all kinds of things. We end up having Alex, who keeps shifting from place to place to place within this seemingly obstacle treehouse like course. And so we end up having Alex climbing up on this one place to where when Glenn is to follow, we end up having some trick being in place to where Glenn ends up falling on his face, or reasonably, Glenn can't get to a certain rung of which where Alex had taken some piece of wood off to where Glenn can't make his way to Alex. And so Glenn ends up adjusting and going to some other section of where Alex is at. And we end up having the Checker Ninja going and taking down that ladder. And so we end up having Glenn scrambling to consistently try to find some way via rope or something else to get to Alex, and that just triggers some trap, of course, to where Glenn ends up getting shot up into this rope to this part where he is to be dumped onto this cart. This cart is to go into a big, huge, like roller coaster-ish like ride thing, to where he is going to be flying into a big vat of mud towards the tail end of this. So we end up having it to where everybody thinks, oh yeah, Glenn is done. He's dead. Like, this guy looks like a schmuck. And so we end up having eventually that Glenn is to finally go and start attacking Alex. And so we end up having, of course, where Alex is to finally actually fight out Glenn. And to the point of Alex just being able to, yeah, he ends up getting hit, but most of the times he ends up going and protecting himself, even hitting Glenn in the grapefruits in the downtown in the balls, and so because we end up having the Checkered Ninja hitting Alex in the balls, and so we end up having we end up having uh, Alex learning that from the Checkered Ninja. So we go on and we end up having Alex eventually learning how to eventually uh, get Glenn into a submission. And so we end up having Glenn who ends up giving up and he ends up stopping. And so we end up having everybody going like, hooray, Alex won, whoop-de-doo for him. And so we end up having Jessica arriving and she's like, well, like, I think someone needs to go to my party. And so we end up having everybody going, hooray, Alex did it. And so, like, the Checker Ninja is like, great, now I can go with him to this party and find Jessica's father and get my revenge. So we end up having Alex and the Checkered Ninja going to this party, and so we end up having Alex, who's overly confident and saying like, well, yeah, I guess I really did do it, and yeah, I guess I really was the best. And we end up having the Checkered Ninja is like, dude, you're taking a lot of the credit for this. It's like, you are acting like such uh, uh, a smug guy, let's just say. A smug guy. So we end up having Alex, who is to be reminded by the Checkered Ninja of what they are actually here for. And we end up having Alex, who is only interested, like, well, like, Jessica's here and she wants to dance with me, so I guess I should dance with her. And the Checkered Ninja's like, no, like, Jessica's father, we need to get to this now. Like, you need to help me. I helped you. So now, like, I scratch your back, you scratch mine. That's the way this is supposed to go. And we end up having to where Alex is like, well, like, with everything going so well with me right now, like, why do I still need to help you out? Like, I think everything is just going well for me. And we end up having the Checker Ninja going like, oh, you think everything is going swimmingly for you? Well, I can correct that. So, we end up having Alex, who ends up forcibly needing to help out the Checkered Ninja. And so, we end up having Alex taking the Checkered Ninja to this kitchen where the parents are at, watching over this party. We end up having Alex, who ends up ushering Jessica's mother back into the party. And so, we end up having Alex alone uh, with Jessica's father, which is he's kind of looking inside the fridge right now, so you don't see who exactly he is, of course. So we end up having this fridge closing to notice that this is not the actual guy. And so the Checker Ninja notices that, and he ends up going, oh, whoa, 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 like, this is not the guy. And so we end up having it to where we end up finding out that it seems that Jessica's father has the exact same name as some toy owner, which is actually the guy. And so we end up finding out that it seems that this guy was in some newspaper, luckily enough, and that this guy is to uh, be somewhere locally here in this town. And so We end up having also that Jessica's father is contemplating a name change because of this of not want excuse me, not wanting to be relate or having the same name as this guy, and so on and so forth. So we go along and we end up having the Checker Ninja wanting to go after this guy because they end up are able to find this guy's address and find exactly where he is, and dot 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 dot. So we end up having the Checker Ninja desperately wanting Alex to help him and find this guy, and Alex wants to go and dance with Jessica. And so we end up having it to where the Checkered Ninja decides to ruin everything that is going on with Alex. He ends up going and having Alex going out to the dance floor, and the Checker Ninja ends up splashing liquid all over Alex's pants, basically shouting out that he peed himself, that he's probably going to poop himself later on. We also have it to where the Checker Ninja runs to Alex, who is using the bathroom at this point, and so the Checker Ninja ends up dumping uh, Jessica for Alex. Basically, the Checker Ninja mentions that he's too good for her and all kinds of things, and so he's dumping her while she's in the bathroom. And so when Alex ends up coming back to where Jessica is, Jessica ends up kind of like really upset with Alex, and so on and so forth. So Jessica ends up going and making out with Alex's best friend, and so that ends up happening. So we end up also having, while Alex and the Checkered Ninja are putting together all these traps for Glenn, we end up finding out the Checkered Ninja's whole backstory. We end up finding out that this character was actually legitimately a ninja who used to fight off samurais. It seems that this guy's priority was to try to protect his homesake, his family, and everyone, all his loved ones, within some environment. And we end up finding out that the samurais ended up coming and interrupting that homeland and killing all of seemingly this Checkered Ninja's uh, family and everybody, and so on and so forth. And so, since this ninja ended up failing in his task, he ended up taking a sword to himself, and we end up having this ninja being spirited away to eventually go after any wrongdoings that has ever happened with anybody. And so, like, the spirit of this character seems to live on through dead objects to eventually get their vengeance on some right that or some wrong that needs to be turned right. So interesting kind of backstory, but it is what it is. So we end up having it to where Alex forcibly needs to now go with the Checkered Ninja to go and find this guy, and so he does. We end up having the Checkered Ninja and Alex going to find this guy's home, and it is actually the correct guy this time. And so we end up having it to where the Checkered Ninja was going to try and seek vengeance on this guy and kill him, and we end up having Alex who ends up trying to prevent that. And so we also end up finding out that this guy seems to have some dog of sorts, and so we eventually have this dog who is to consistently be called Bingo, and every time they say his name, the dog goes wild. So we end up having Alex preventing the Checkered Ninja from getting vengeance on this guy, and we end up having this guy going and like security proofing his home, blocking some room to where the Checkered Ninja and Alex can't get out, and eventually a dog ends up trying to attack them at some point. But the Checkered Ninja keeps hitting them, keeps hitting the dog at some pressure point to where the dog instantly goes to sleep. So we have the Checkered Ninja who ends up putting some like zip line like thing for both Alex and uh, and the Checkered Ninja to get away, and so they do. So we end up having Alex talking to the Checkered Ninja because we end up having Alex knowing exactly when this guy is going to leave on this plane. And so we end up having the Checker Ninja wanting to know that date of which that this guy is going to leave off of this plane, and Alex will not tell him. And so we end up having the Checker Ninja going like, well, if you're not going to give me that information, I'm going to make your life like the worst it can ever be. And so we end up having Alex who is like, dude, like my life is already bad. And he's like, no, like I can make it worse. So we end up having the Checkered Ninja like going to the point of almost fighting out Alex, to the point of him almost killing Alex, but he can't do it. And so, because they have too much of a bond now, it's impossible for him to go and actually kill him now. But we end up having the Checker Ninja who is threatening to kill other people that Alex does know. And so we end up having the Checker Ninja going after Sean, and so Alex has to try and save Sean from the Checkered Ninja. And so we end up having the Checkered Ninja trying to take a pillow over Sean's face, which ends up having Alex trying to save Sean from being choked out with his pillow. And we end up having it to where Sean screams in anger, or screams and being upset and all kinds of things. And so uh, Alex's parents rush in to say, you know what, like I think you need to go and see somebody. And so we end up having Alex forcibly being put into this hospital, and we end up having eventually where Alex is to try and uh, get one of the doctors to come and help him, which is actually the Checker Ninja. And so we end up having these two people calling it a truce because Alex comes up with the plan of, why do you actually need to kill this guy? What if you can just make him wish he was dead? And the Checkered Ninja's like, well, hey, that sounds like a real legitimate plan, but how exactly can we do that? And so Alex has a plan. So we end up having the Checker Ninja figuring out a way to uh, release Alex from this hospital. And so we end up having Alex going to his uncle for information about drug dealers, and it seems that his uncle has some information. So we end up having Alex going and finding this drug dealer named Rectangle. And so we end up having Alex getting these drugs from this guy, and then the Checker Ninja ends up beating him up and putting him in the back of this trunk. So they take the drugs so that way they can put it inside the Checker Ninja. So the Checker Ninja could go inside this guy's luggage, so that way he ends up getting popped for illegally having drugs. So we end up having it to where Alex and the Checkered Ninja are to scramble to make it to their way to this airport. So we end up having Alex trying as much as possible to make it to where the Checkered Ninja ends up getting on with the luggage of this guy, but this guy is far too ahead of them. And so we end up having the Checkered Ninja having to go on somebody else's luggage that is going to the same location. And so we end up having this Checker Ninja who is to eventually get out of this luggage like thing. And so we end up eventually seeing that the guy that the Checker Ninja is after is going almost out of this building. So we end up having the Checkered Ninja going and finding a drug dog. And so we end up having the Checkered Ninja like hitting his chest to where there's seemingly some drug residue. And then so we end up having the Checkered Ninja having this drug dog chase after him to eventually to where the Checker Ninja ends up landing onto this guy, and we end up having the Checker Ninja ripped in half to where the uh, drugs are to end up in the hands of the police, to where they end up arresting this guy because this doll is in his possession. So we end up having uh, us find out that it seems that the Checkered Ninja had left some voice message for Jessica with Alex's voice. We end up having Alex going to school one day, and it seems that um, that Jessica ends up replaying this voicemail for her best friends and Alex to hear, and so we end up having Alex ending up kissing Jessica and cementing their relationship. So I think I almost covered everything with this movie, and so really we end up having it to where it seems that there is some trouble within this town, and so we end up having Alex decide that he's like, well, hey, you know what? You know what I should do? Maybe I'll become the Checkered Ninja. And so we end up having, bizarrely, that Alex ends up putting on this checkered scarf and going out to defend his city. Bizarrely, that's the way the movie ends. I'm like, okay, that doesn't exactly make sense. But I guess since Alex has this fighting skill, he might as well be able to use it, right? So, with that said, that's just the way this movie ends, and I am going to get out of here. This movie was really fun. I really enjoyed it. I really liked it. It was such a weird, bizarre-ish like movie, and I just had fun with it. Like, it was a fun movie. There were some horror-like elements. It reminded me of Child's Play. It reminded me of a lot of other movies. And it was really fun. So I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.